Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Dear listeners, thank you for tuning in to this conversation with George Mycock about muscle dysmorphia, exercise addiction, and disordered eating. George and I are both very passionate about these topics, so my originally planned 4-hour-long podcast turned into a 2-hour conversation. Therefore, this week I'm starting with part 1, and next week you're going to get part 2. Without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Yo, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm sitting with George Mycock to talk about muscle dysmorphia, disordered eating, and exercise addiction. George, welcome to the podcast and thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's nice to be here.
So what I always open the podcast with is a question on who you are, what you do, and why you're so awesome at it so that everyone can get to know you.
I was practicing my version of this before we came on. I listened to your podcast with Shannon Beer, and I was like, "Oh, I need to come up with a cool way of responding to this." So my name is George Mycock. I didn't come up with a cool way, just at a time I tried, but here we go. My name is George Mycock. Unfortunately enough, with that last name, it's a terrible one. But here we are. I'm a PhD candidate, so I study muscularity-oriented issues in men. So by that I mean things like muscle dysmorphia, disordered eating around muscularity, and all that jazz. I also am the founder of a mental health organization called MyoMinds, which works similarly in research. The main kind of mission for MyoMinds is about trying to improve knowledge and disseminate it to other people, so other people know about the issues that people who exercise can struggle with. So things like exercise addiction, disordered eating, body image concerns, etc. The reason why I'm so awesome at it, I as most people, I go through imposter syndrome, and especially some of the stuff I get to do with my own minds. Sometimes I'm like, I have no idea how I've got in this position, but here I am. I think the reason I'm good at it is because I'm very passionate about it, and I think hopefully that shows when people ask me questions. I tend to I guess a pre-warning in advance for you, Nikias, is I think every podcast I've ever been on, I hold the record for the longest podcast they've done or close to. So I'll try. I've been working on it, so hopefully it won't be too bad today. But I tend to get really excited and I want to talk about it a lot, and also probably talk about it today. I have my own lived experience with the stuff that I research, which you have to be careful with research, because I have to make sure that I'm not just putting my experience onto the data that I'm collecting and the way I analyze things, but in the same way, it means I have a nuanced perspective that other researchers might not be able to see or kind of think of, because I can be like, oh, well, when I felt that, it wasn't what you guys are saying, it was actually this, and then we can look into that, and maybe that's right, or maybe it's wrong, and we don't know. So yeah, that's my long-winded answer.
Yeah, don't worry at all. Take all of the time that you want to talk, because I've done all the work I need to do earlier this morning. I don't have a client for at least a couple hours. We're all good. But aside from that, thank you for the excellent introduction. It was definitely cool, at least in my view. And I'm the host, so my opinion is the only one that matters, really. And the first question I wanted to ask is, well, first off, as I told you off air, and for the listeners, I do want to delve into your lived experience. So my first question about for the podcast today would be about muscle dysmorphia. So first off, can you define what muscle dysmorphia is, and then talk to us a little bit about how you personally experienced it, if you did?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to caveat before I start, I said to you off air, I'm not feeling very well today. So, if I'm not as coherent as I would previously be, I apologize up front to your listeners. So, muscle dysmorphia is it's classed as a specifier or a variant of body dysmorphic disorder in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which for people who don't know is basically a big book of mental health diagnostic stuff that people, that psychiatrists, psychologists, etc., use to diagnose people with things. And within that book, there's body dysmorphic disorder, which has a list of components that tend to be around someone having some kind of preoccupation and a feeling of certainty that there is some kind of flaw with their body, whatever that might be. It doesn't have to be muscle or body fat or that kind of thing. It can be skin, it can be nose, it can be like all sorts of different. It can be anything like on your body. Um, and if someone is diagnosed with that, then the doctor can specify what like further. And one of the specifications is muscle dysmorphia. So if they have these symptoms of body dysmorphic disorder, and also it's around a perceived flaw in their level of muscle, and that is both size and or leanness. So it doesn't have to just be these people who are trying to get as massive as possible. It can be people focused on becoming super lean and super shredded. Then it leads to muscle dysmorphia, and muscle dysmorphia maybe we can talk about as we go on, but it's linked to numerous kind of physical and mental health symptoms and consequences that can be really dangerous, and for me was really dangerous. I was never diagnosed with muscle dysmorphia, I'll say up front, and I don't think that's because I'll rephrase my answer. I think that's because of issues with the criteria and the way that we understand muscle dysmorphia in a clinical sense. Because I research muscle dysmorphia, I have this company where I talk about muscle dysmorphia. I've been in several documentaries and TV shows and all sorts about muscle dysmorphia. I think I've met one person so far who has been diagnosed with it. So I'm as deep in the trenches as you can be, and I've met one person. So but we know that the symptoms are a lot higher than one person in the prevalent studies that we do have. It seems to be a lot more common when we go out there and kind of not force people, but we ask people to do these surveys. A lot of people show the symptoms, but nobody's getting diagnosed. So it's
Mm.
not just a me thing. But yeah, so I guess yeah, for me, muscle dysmorphia revolved around my feeling that I both wasn't big enough and wasn't lean enough. And those aspects of the way that I viewed my body as being insufficient were almost synonymous, or at least very deeply entrenched in my own identity. And something I look into in my research, and for me, it was specifically my identity as uh, self-identifying as a man who wants to be masculine. Masculinity was such a key part for me in that I wanted to, for me anyway, it was my dad. My dad was very hardworking, very kind of endured a lot of pain. He used to play rugby. He was quite a big guy. So all these stereotypical masculine traits that people get pushed onto them. I felt like I needed to be them, and for whatever reason, I felt like I wasn't them. And muscle building, generating that body, generating that look, and making people think that I was those things was what I was obsessed with. And so when I couldn't stick to my exercise, when I couldn't stick to my diet, it wasn't just that, oh, I'm a dick for not sticking to that. It was I'm useless now. I'm not what I'm supposed to be, and that kind of led to these spirals of my mental health over and over again.
How old were you when you developed these symptoms of muscle dysmorphia?
Yeah, so I think I started to so muscle dysmorphia. I think it started probably around 18-ish,
Mm.
but I started with kind of the disordered eating and the body image concerns when I was around 14, 15. I broke my spine when I was 13, and I gained a lot of weight from the injury, and I again felt like I had lost a lot of this respect, and felt like people were treating me differently because I'd gained so much weight. And I found that as I lost weight, people were, if you're in I think I was technically obese according to BMI, but BMI is bullshit. in my opinion anyway. But I was technically obese according to BMI, and and I wasn't before. And people, anyone who's lived in an obese body knows that if you lose weight, no one gives a shit how you're losing it. Or I was pretty much at one point starving myself and exercising multiple times a day. Um, you know, doing kind of purging tactic with exercise, self-induced vomiting, that kind of stuff. But people just saw me losing weight. So people were like, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. And so I originally was very much thinness oriented. And then as I kind of got into nutrition and got into exercise, I started to look at different media sources, social media, magazines, internet, etc. And all the men in that media that I was looking up to all had big shoulders, big arms, veins, six pack, etc. So I kind of thought, oh, I need to be that. And again, as well, those bodies were not just bodies; they were tied to like masculinity. It was, are you man enough to do this workout? Like, look at these like big guns and these like, you know what I mean? Like, it's all very tied into. If you want to be masculine, you have to look this way.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought I needed to be. So yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. So it sounds like between 13 and 18, that's when you were leanness oriented and you developed disordered eating. And then from 18 onwards, that's when you also became obsessed, if I can use that word, with the idea of being also as muscular and as lean as possible to embody these masculinity ideals that you thought you needed to embody.
Yeah, perfect. And I think obsessed is um, a very kind of precise word that you should use, because body dysmorphic disorder is very closely linked to OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, because it is there's an obsession and there's compulsions that are tied into it. So yeah, I think obsession is the exact word I would use.
So in that case, you touched upon symptoms of muscle dysmorphia and symptoms that you ask people or force people, whichever which choice word we
Oh,
want.
no, definitely not force. Force is the wrong word.
Well, when you ask your participants to fill out these surveys, what are the symptoms that would classify somebody as having muscle dysmorphia?
Yeah. So again, when I mentioned before that the clinical symptoms aren't necessarily accurate in my opinion, and
Mm,
there's a lot of researchers who kind of argue that it needs to be, it's currently very narrow,
yes.
and it's specifically around the overwhelming preoccupation with not being muscular enough, and often compulsive levels of exercise. So there isn't a specific number on the amount of exercise that someone should be doing, because professional athletes, fitness influencers and those kind of things, they have to do a lot of exercise. It's their job,
Hmm.
so we can't put a number on it. But it's that compulsion around it, feeling like you need to do it, which maybe I can talk a bit more about.
Yes.
And then that yeah, that overwhelming sense that you don't look the way you're supposed to, and also quite often that other people don't see that issue that you're so obsessed that you have. You think you're
Hmm.
really small, but other people don't see that.
Hmm.
So those are the main ones. But also, one of the reasons why we think that the clinical symptoms might not be as accurate as they could be is because when we do interviews with people who have been diagnosed with muscle dysmorphia, or when researchers find people who have very high symptoms of muscle dysmorphia, they also tend to have the disordered eating aspects and these
Yes.
types of eating behaviors that can cause significant negative distress as well, and cause these kind of significant problems for them. But according to the current kind of clinical guidelines, it shouldn't, someone with muscle dysmorphia shouldn't technically have that. But
Hmm.
so it becomes very confusing and kind of all over the place. But yeah, it's mostly around that, um, being convinced that you're not muscular enough, leanness and size when other people don't see
Hmm.
it, and those obsessive exercise behaviors.
That makes sense. In fact, I said yes just now because it surprised me when you listed these symptoms that there's nothing related to nutrition.
Mm. Yeah, and it is surprising, and it's something. There's a researcher called Stuart Murray
Hmm.
over in America who, back in 2010, when before muscle dysmorphia had been kind of cemented as a clinical disorder in 2013, he basically argued that it would be better or more prudent to put muscle dysmorphia as a form of eating disorder, um, partially because of the symptoms that we see. And you're in the fitness industry. We all talk about how nutrition's 90% of the game. Like the first thing you sort out is your nutrition, and then you can think about, normally it's like sleep, then nutrition, then exercise, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So it would be odd if someone was this obsessed with muscle and didn't engage in some kind of extreme level of diet. Like that would be
Hmm.
that's quite rare. um but still, and understandably so, there's a lot of evidence linking it to body dysmorphic disorder. But there's actually more evidence now, people suggesting that maybe it's a completely separate disorder, like it's not an eating disorder or a body dysmorphic disorder, it's just like a separate entity altogether. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's very common that people who have muscle dysmorphia struggle with dieting, because so much of what we um, talk about, and so much that's important for trying to build muscle, is your nutrition. Like you
Yeah.
need a certain amount of protein, you need a certain amount of calories, you need these things in place in order to build muscle. So it makes sense that if you have such a disordered relationship with wanting to be muscular, that you might then generate a disordered relationship with food as well. So
Yeah,
even
exactly.
though that's not technically part of the symptoms, it is something to look out for, I suppose.
Yeah, agreed. So with that, I want to talk about both exercise addiction and disordered eating. But given that, technically speaking, exercise addiction is a symptom and disordered eating apparently is not at the moment, let's start with exercise addiction, which is also the first thing you mentioned, being your experience. How do you define? You said earlier we can't really put a number on the number of sessions you do or the workload that you undergo and call it, you do this much and that's exercise addiction, because as you say, some athletes do a lot of workload in terms of training that a non-athlete wouldn't undergo, and yet they're not necessarily, they don't have an addiction. So how do you define exercise addiction, and what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so the definition is difficult, and researchers argue about it a lot. And in fact, even the terminology exercise addiction is it's the one that I use,
Hmm.
but it's a bit controversial for some researchers. Some people prefer compulsive exercise or exercise dependency. And so the real answer is, as research perspective, we don't really know. And I don't think anyone can fully like define it yet. I think it's one of the things we're still trying to figure out. I think what we're hinting at, and the definition of exercise addiction, is combining both compulsion and dependency.
Hmm.
So I'll go kind of through both of them. Dependency is kind of what it sounds like. I think it's the easiest one to understand, when you depend on it for some reason. So, uh, there's kind of the classic positive feedback loop and a negative feedback loop, which is, so the positive one, which is a kind of a better one to be in, is when I do more exercise, my body changes and I like the way that is, or I make more friends, or I feel better, the endorphins, that kind of stuff. So I want that to keep going. So I want to do more exercise. So you keep going around there. I want to do more. I want to do more. I want to do more. I want to keep doing it. The problem is that can quite subtly change too. When I do exercise, my body changes. I make friends. If I stop doing it, will that no longer be the case? Will I lose my friends? Will I lose the way I feel? Will my anxiety come back? Will I be a
Hmm.
loser? Will everyone hate me? All this kind of stuff. Now I need to do it, otherwise something terrible is going to happen to me. And that can become a really entrenched thing, and something that I really struggled with, and it's kind of the essence of dependency. In a sense, it's based in fear and based in guilt of, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
yeah, yeah, it's like, holy shit, if I stop doing exercise, I'm gonna, like, something really bad's gonna happen. And then compulsion, which kind of goes hand in hand, hence why it's like kind of teamed up with exercise addiction. The way that I've been explaining it recently, it is that essence of needing to do something, and feeling an overwhelming urge to do something. And yeah, the way that I explain it is, because I think people often, when they hear that, if they haven't experienced it themselves, they think of it as a kind of cognitive thing, where I think through it and I go, oh, I should probably do exercise. I'm gonna have to do it soon, blah blah blah. And I get in my own head about it. Often it wasn't that. It's more guttural than that, is the way I can explain it. A good metaphor is it if I ask you to hold your breath and ask your listeners to hold your breath for as long as you possibly can, at some point you're going to feel, you don't think it through, you don't talk to yourself about it, you're just going to feel like, I need to take a breath right now, otherwise I can't hold it any longer. And you will. And whereas in actual fact you probably could have gone a few more seconds. People often train themselves to get past that panic stage and realize they can hold their breath for way longer than they realize, but you still sense that overwhelming fear of, I need to take this breath.
Hmm.
That's the closest feeling I can think of to how I felt about exercise. It was, for something happened in my day, I felt a certain way for whatever reason, and suddenly I need to do exercise right now to get rid of this feeling. To do it was just a guttural sense of, this needs to happen. And I suppose I've already spoken about my experience there to some degree, but I very much depended on exercise to, as I mentioned, to work on my identity, and that tied into masculinity to some degree, but also to feel like I could be loved. I very much equated that kind of respect I felt I got from the way that I trained, and it wasn't just the way my body looked either. It was also the fact that I was like stronger and I was pushing myself really hard. I was that guy like screaming in the corner, and which is fine if people do that. But I was a big like screamer and like, I'm gonna do this, and slapping each other with my friends and all that kind of stuff. And that display was something I depended on. And the compulsion was there because I was so terrified that if I stopped, that something bad would happen, and also because it was the only coping mechanism I had for any negative feelings I felt. I think I didn't have another way to um, kind of help with my how my mental health was and how I felt about myself, other than doing exercise and sticking to my diet. So it became this. I need to do it, otherwise I'm going to lose everything.
Thank you for sharing that. So, was there ever a week or a few days when you wanted to exercise but you had to skip it for whatever reason? And if you ever missed a workout during that period of time, what happened to you? How did you feel?
Yeah, so there was multiple times where I couldn't, not even just because something got in the way, but because the standard of what I classed as a kind of worthy exercise session grew constantly. Because
Hmm.
I think every time I successfully completed one of my workouts, whether it be a certain rep range or with a certain weight or whatever it was, that kind of confirmed to myself that it wasn't quite hard enough. I needed to do a bit more. It
Hmm.
even got to the point where um, I'm kind of tussling whether I want to say this, but I guess it's good to be honest in this, and I don't think I'm necessarily encouraging people to, because it was a terrible idea. But it even got to the point where if I didn't throw up from how like hard I worked, or even sometimes like I'd fainted a couple times
Hmm.
from trying to do stuff, that then it was a failure of a workout. It got to that point where if I'm not sick from how much I'm doing, I didn't do it well enough. And so even if it got to the point where even doing the exercise wasn't enough, if it wasn't to such an extreme level.
Hmm.
um and that led the issue was, so every time that happened I felt this sense of kind of shame and loss of identity, and kind of like grief for losing that version of myself that I felt like I was for a bit. Finally doing the exercise, finally sticking to the diet, finally my body's looking somewhere near where I want it to be. um and I just felt so overwhelmed, and this kind of cycle happened for a while where I'd feel a bit better and then I'd have to stop, and then feel a bit better and then I'd stop. And I used to lock myself away because I was so ashamed of people seeing me. I was so certain that people would just see it on my face, that workout wasn't good enough, and that and they'd just instantly think I was a piece of shit and just hate me, and just it was just, I can't explain it in any rational way because it was irrational. um I was so certain that people would know and people would hate me for it. And it got to the point where, I had tried enough times and in my eyes failed enough times that I just didn't think I should be here anymore. And that's when I started to really struggle with suicidality. And I'd thought about it for a long time, and got to the point where I planned it and decided a day and everything. And yeah, and it got to that day, and I'm very lucky that one of my friends from university came to visit me at my house. She hadn't seen me for a few weeks because I'd been hiding away. And yeah, I think she texted me at first. I didn't respond, so she just turned up at my door, and just kind of knocked on, and yeah, I think saved me, because then I kind of just cried in front of her and just told her how horrible I was feeling, and then she convinced me to speak to my parents, who then helped me find a counsellor, and kind of my recovery journey started from there, really.
That was really fortunate, and thank you so much for being so honest about this. The reason why I asked is that I was wondering if you've seen it in research or you've experienced it yourself, whether when you can't follow through with these behaviors that you're addicted to, people have compensatory mechanisms, like similar to the binging and purging cycle in binge eating disorder, where the person has an uncontrolled binge and then afterwards purges those calories by overdoing it with exercise. And I was wondering if maybe there's a similar mechanism with exercise addiction as well, maybe food related, where some people might find that they restrict their intake as a result of not exercising as they plan to.
There's definitely they call it debting behavior in like kind of the eating disorder research, where you kind of view exercise and food as like kind of monetary value. So if I don't exercise as much, I have to eat less as well to kind of make up for it. And there would definitely was that sense with me, but also in regards to the kind of exercise addiction, it was very closely linked again to this identity that I had, this kind of good version of myself that I wanted to show to the world. And there was, when I couldn't stick to my exercise, there was kind of a, like I feel like in the fitness world they call it kind of, I can't think of the name they call it, but at least me and my friends used to call it kind of like the fuck it moment, where you would like, you'd have like a donut and you'd be like, oh fuck it, I might as well just like have 10 donuts now and like, take the whole week off and just do whatever I want. And those I kind of got into that mindset often, where my exercise workout wouldn't be right, or I didn't go for whatever reason. I'd feel so ashamed of myself and so weak and useless and pointless that I'd just be like, you know what, I don't care, I'm just gonna like order loads of food and binge eat basically, and not go to the gym and just hide away and just spiral. And I think that was part of the reason why they call it catastrophizing, I think, in like rational motive behavioral therapy. Where it was one bad workout, but it became everything and just became this horrible moment for me. So my I guess my way of coping with it to some degree was to just let go of everything. But in the same vein, there was a level of that kind of debting behavior as well, quite often, where if I didn't quite catastrophize, if it wasn't bad enough for that to happen, there was definitely those moments where I would then manipulate my diet as well. But again, that's I could talk about this forever, because it's also there was a part of it that was health related, and wanting to. I know on Shannon Beer's the podcast that you did with Shannon Beer, you were talking about that striving to kind of work on your body isn't necessarily a bad thing. And even I still go to the gym now, and I still like kind of try and eat quote unquote healthily now. And that I don't class that as disordered, but there was something there that made it bad.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think with muscle dysmorphia, For one, I think it's less well known than eating disorders, like for example anorexia. So people wouldn't necessarily know that it can be an issue.
Mm.
But also all of the behaviors involved with muscle dysmorphia are in some way exalted as the way to achieve physique related goals,
Mm.
because you are eating a certain way, eating a lot of protein, sometimes a lot of calories if your aim is to gain muscle, sometimes a lot less calories if your aim is to lose body fat. You're training often, so obviously that's a massive component of building more muscle, and that's essentially what the fitness community recommends, not because it's trying to give people muscle dysmorphia, but because it is how you achieve these goals. The difference lies in the fact that, well, speaking from a personal experience, I had an eating disorder, a restrictive eating disorder, for 7 years. And then I had disordered eating for a few years after that. So, all in all, it was a good decade. And the way that manifested for me was, in part, exercise addiction. Like you, the bar kept moving higher and higher because I was completely weight loss oriented. I was overweight. I lost all of that weight, and I truly believed that if I didn't do as much exercise as I was doing, and I didn't eat as little as I was eating, and the specific foods that I was eating, so there was an orthorexic component to it,
Mm.
then I would regain all of the weight and I wouldn't be able to maintain the results that I had achieved. So, for me, it wasn't necessarily a case of making the exercise intense, because for me, I purely focused on cardio. So it was all about the time for me. If I didn't do it for X amount of time, then my results would fall apart. And the reason why I bring my experience up is that I've thought about it and I've read some research on it as well, obviously not to your level. And my understanding is that the difference between the two behaviors is between the two frames of mind lies in how it affects your life. If you're if these behaviors dictate your life, then that's when you have some sort of issue around it that could be clinically diagnosed. Like for me, there was a time when if I didn't do my however many workouts I intended on doing, even if I had to move them by one day, that would be a mental breakdown. It would mean that on the day that I was going to exercise and I couldn't, I probably wouldn't eat. Or I never actually went a full day without eating at all. But if I had planned a couple of meals, let's call them that, but they were really low in calories, so they were not really meals. But let's say that I had planned certain food to eat, I would eat at least a little less than that, because in my head I was making sure to make up for the calories that I wasn't burning on that day because I wasn't exercising. Whereas now, I honestly, if you looked at the way I eat and if you looked at the way I train, you would think that the behaviors haven't really changed, except now I eat enough. But if I have to move a workout, I move it.
Mm.
Uh, if I don't want to work out, I don't work out. And if I want to eat differently, I eat differently and I don't make a big deal of it. So those behaviors no longer dictate the way that I live my life.
Yeah, and yeah, you've really hit the nail on the head there. It's the I mentioned before the significant negative distress. That's a big part of any. I think almost any mental health disorder diagnosis is that it has that significant negative effect on your life. Um, and yeah, it's a very, very important aspect because it controlling your life doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Because my immediate thought was bodybuilders, like it does control their life to some degree,
Hmm.
um, but it's a really difficult one to find with bodybuilding because if you're in season and you're going to compete, then it controls your life. Everything goes around it. But in the
Hmm.
same way that everyone's normal, like other job, it does. You have to work
Yeah.
around your work, so that's normal. Um, but I think it comes down to, as I think you're suggesting there, that during those off season moments, they can then be more relaxed and they can then feel a bit better about the fact that they can skip a workout, or they can just move a workout, or those kind of things. But yeah, thank you for sharing your experience. And yeah, I don't know if you want me to ask you questions back, but I do have a question. And
Yeah, go ahead.
I what do you think changed for you, um, from where, like, what is it that changed that allows you now to like move workouts and it not affect you as much as it did before?
Oh, that's a really good question. Let me take a moment to think about it. Mhm. I think the main reason may be that I can now recognize that what I believed isn't true. At the time, I truly believed that if I missed that workout, or if I ate the extra half apple, and I use that as a very specific example because at some point eating half an apple was what I was eating, and if I had more than that, it wouldn't have happened. Basically, I literally cut the apple in half. I weighed the half that I intended on eating. I made sure it was exactly the weight it needed to be, and then I ate it. That's how long it took me to eat an apple. Not a whole apple, just half an apple. Anyway, moving on. At the time, I truly believed that if I didn't stick to these rules that I had created for myself, I would lose what I'd been able to achieve, because adhering to those rules had enabled me to lose a lot of weight. And as you said, people complimented me left and right about how I'd managed to be so disciplined, how I changed my physique in such a notable way. And that only reinforced the idea that those behaviors were right. I saw the results I wanted. Clearly, other people saw them too. So that was the way that I could achieve those results. I was 15, between 14 and 15 when I started. I was 16 when I realized that that was a problem. It wasn't just me trying to lose a little bit of weight. Now it was me having an eating disorder. So I had a very black or white mindset, and I couldn't see past. I also, personality wise, I am very efficiency oriented. So for me, the most efficient path to the goal is the best path. But at the time, being so young and immature, it wasn't just the best path, it was the only path. So I didn't want to take any other alternative. I couldn't see any alternative, but had I seen one, I probably wouldn't have wanted it because it would have felt less than.
Mm.
Whereas what I can see now is that, for one, that is not the best way to the goals that I have now. It is not the only way. And also, I think what I was reflecting about as you were talking is how interesting it is that when you deal with these issues, one component of your mentality is the short term view. Like, it seems like neither of us could see the long term outcome of our behaviors. Whereas, if I think about it now, what would happen if I skipped a workout? Well, I aim to be immortal, so probably nothing, because it's a drop in the ocean relative to the amount of infinite years that I'm going to be on this earth. Whereas at the time, if I missed a workout, it was like I was convinced that the next day I would wake up and look exactly like I did when I was overweight.
Mm. I wouldn't that kind of feels almost just inherently human, in a sense that, we were, at least maybe speaking for myself, but I was so scared that I
Hmm.
wasn't enough, and I was so terrified that I needed constant proof that I was. And as human beings, we live in the moment. We can, as much as we have anxiety about the future and we think about things, we do experience the moment, and that's all we ever do. And in that sense, maybe that's where that fear, and well, that's where that fear manifests, because it thrives in that moment, where we can't have the I suppose logical brain that says, well, actually, if I miss this workout, I'm just going to do it tomorrow, or whenever I'm just going to continue doing them afterwards, and it'll be fine. um you know but it's interesting that, yeah, so it sounds like almost education was was the turning point for you when you learned about nutrition and learned about exercise? And it's interesting because the reason I say that to some degree is because I'm doing a systematic review at the moment on help seeking behavior for appearance concerns in men.
Mm-hmm.
So like body image, disordered eating, that kind of thing, and people seeking help for it. And one of the big barriers that I've found that seems to be reported across research is that the men tend to say that they didn't know enough about what a healthy version of exercise and a healthy version of eating was. So they just assumed what they were doing was fine. And then when they realized, oh, like this is actually unhealthy, then they were more likely to be like, oh shit, this is a problem, and I need to now seek help. So it sounds like your story was kind of similar to that in at least maybe in a little bit of an aspect anyway.
I think it is partly down to education, as you say. I wouldn't say I didn't realize that it was unhealthy, because at some point it was very clear to me and all involved that it was unhealthy. Like even I, when I was more rational about it, could say, I don't weigh enough. Like this is not how much I should weigh, because I'm not healthy in at this body weight. And however, I wouldn't say I didn't realize that it was unhealthy, but more so I thought, well, if I do anything else, it's not going to work the same way, and I don't want to lose what I've achieved. So the education helped me in that it showed me, actually you're going to get better results, because you can be at a healthy body composition, and you can also not have all of these behaviors that are now dictating how you feel and dictating what you do every hour of the day, and your brain never shuts the fuck up. So there was that, but also you just reminded me that another reason is that now I've trained myself, in that I overcame the majority of my issues on my own. I never saw anyone. I was never clinically diagnosed. And the way I did it was exposure therapy. My biggest fear was the sense of guilt that I would feel if I didn't follow my plan. It wasn't the act of eating a piece of cake. It wasn't the act of missing a workout. I was terrified of the feeling that either of those things would bring. If you even at the time, if you'd said to me, "Are you scared of cake?" I would have said no. But if you'd ask me, okay, would you like to eat this piece of cake? I would freeze. I literally would freeze up. I was paralyzed. I couldn't touch the cake. I couldn't look at it. I would have cried if you tried to force feed it to me. I would have probably fought back against you to stop me from doing it. And the reason was because I was simply terrified of this feeling of guilt. But once I decided that enough was enough and I really wanted to recover, I went through a phase with food, especially with exercise. It was a bit different, where I purposefully put myself in a position where I was going to eat a food I was afraid of. And I discovered that nothing happened, but also over time, the overwhelming sense of guilt went away.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's making me think of I'm trying to think. I can't remember the name. I think they're called like pragmatist. Like there's an area of philosophy that looks at
Hmm.
the potential of the way that we experience the potential of things, and it's something I thought about semi recently because of what you were speaking about before. Of it's not actually missing the workout or going off the diet that messes with you. It's the potential for what will happen if that
Yeah.
does. And yeah, there's a whole school of philosophy that talks about that, how we experience everything as its potential rather than its actual like what it is. And I
Hmm.
think it aligns so well with that. And it's in the research, especially with exercise addiction and compulsive exercise specifically with this, but they talk about the fear of guilt. And so it's not even just the guilt, it's the fear of the guilt that's going to
Yeah.
come if you don't do it. And that what you were explaining there sounds so much like that. And again, very similar to my experience. I was terrified of what would happen if like, I think if you asked me at the time, like, what do you think is going to happen if you don't
Hmm.
do it? I think if I started explaining it, I would realize that it didn't make sense, because
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna, like, my body's gonna, I'm gonna gain loads of fat and I'm gonna lose all my muscle and all my friends aren't going to like me. And then as I was saying it, I'd be like, well, I've missed workouts before and I didn't lose all my muscle and I didn't gain any body fat and I still got my friends. And like, I'd realize, but there's just that, yeah, it's just the fear of it. It's not even that it's real or it's going to happen.
See, the eating disorder voice in me became very crafty with that, because if I had said to anyone, oh, I think that if I eat this piece of cake tomorrow, I'll wake up and I'll be overweight, I would have laughed at myself to begin with. I would have said, oh, that makes no sense. But the way the eating disorder voice actually answered the question, what's going to happen if you don't do this today, or if you do eat the cake today, was, well, you do it once and then you're going to do it again and then you're going to do it again and you're going to become less and less disciplined over time. So yes, maybe what you're doing now doesn't really do anything to your body right this second, but you're giving yourself leeway once. Well, now you're going to always give yourself leeway, and that's going to spiral. So I scared myself into staying disciplined, essentially.
Yeah, and that's the slippery slope with discipline, isn't it? Is like you can infinitely keep increasing your like. There's no kind of threshold for discipline. You can go forever. You know, how much are you going to discipline yourself and for how long, and how restrictive are you going to get? It becomes a very slippery slope, and it's a foundation of the fitness industry, and at least in the way that people talk about it, it's such a common word that people use and use in a very kind of lazy way often, rather than kind of giving it the nuance that it actually needs, which is that it's good to be disciplined sometimes and to say, you know what, actually, I'm going to try and not do that, or I'm going to try and make sure I go to the gym today because it's going to make me feel better. And even though, that part of my brain tells me I don't want to do it necessarily, I'm going to try. And if I go there and I hate it, I'll leave, and that's fine. And that discipline's fine. But telling yourself, like, I have to keep doing this, otherwise something terrible is going to happen, or no matter how horrible I feel, I have to keep going. That's not good. But you don't see that nuance in the fitness industry as much as I think we should. And again, I'm not trying to shit on the fitness industry indefinitely. I get it. I think a lot of the time we just regurgitate what we see other people do. So people just make posts the same that they saw somebody else do, and they got 100,000 likes. So I might as well say it as well, and maybe I'll get some. And yeah, obviously it's people's jobs, so that becomes difficult. But I hope stuff like this, like podcasts like this, and people talking about the nuances can at least bring that like literacy for people, where they can see that post about discipline and go, oh, actually, I do remember that podcast though that I listened to, and they said that maybe we should think about that. So then we can filter it ourselves.
Yeah, that's exactly why I was hoping to bring you on. On the topic of discipline, something that I was thinking about lately is that when you tell yourself, when you give that narrow view of what discipline is, which is, you push through everything for the sake of this workout or this diet or whatever it may be, and you are entrenched in this dysmorphic or disordered mentality, I also think that it's no longer discipline. You would actually be more disciplined by engaging in behaviors that are going to enable you to recover, because positive discipline is helping you push yourself out of your comfort zone. So if you are disciplined in that you are sticking with this vicious cycle that you're stuck in because that's your comfort zone, discipline isn't pushing you out of your comfort zone. It's just you're just telling yourself, well, I do this because I'm disciplined, but it's because you're comfortable in this cycle. For me, it was very comfortable to adopt these disordered behaviors. Recovery was really uncomfortable, and for me, the positive approach to discipline was to tell myself, you're scared of eating this cake, but you're gonna eat it anyway.
Yeah, I was trying to scribble down notes while you were speaking because there's so many things I wanted to speak to you about. I know I'm going to miss some of them, but I think I really like that. That I've not really thought about it in that sense before, but it makes me think of other things. I suppose, yeah, it comes down to with discipline is that it's subjective, as you're saying there. What you're being disciplined about can be negative. You can be disciplined to do negative things, and sometimes, and also that I think discipline has almost become a mask, or like a way of kind of blurring what could be classed as disordered and what could be problematic. The same way that you were talking about with muscle dysmorphia, and something that we see in the research, if someone has a muscular physique, if someone lifts weights, if someone's gaining muscle, that is for so many people, including a lot of clinicians, that is a big old green tick that says they're great and healthy and we don't need to worry about them at all. And the word discipline feels like that kind of has that connotation as well. If you say if no matter what you're doing, if you're saying I'm being disciplined, there's kind of a big old green tick that says, oh, I don't worry about them, like they're just sticking to their disciplined routine. And it makes me also think about this, because you used the word, I think, negative discipline there or something like that. It made me think of perfectionism, and in the compulsive exercise research again, because perfectionism is really closely linked with disordered eating and these kind of things. But they call it dysfunctional perfectionism, which is where you kind of beat up on yourself because you're not adhering to your perfect ideal, whatever that is. You know, it's okay to have to want to be, or to strive for greatness, so to speak. You know, it's okay to want to do great things or want to, you know, achieve something that you see as perfect, but it's how you react when you don't meet it, because we're not perfect and you're never going to be. You know, all listeners, I hate to break it to you, but you know that no one's ever going to be perfect, I'm afraid. And it's how you react to those failures and those moments where you can't meet it. And it makes me, they kind of reminded me of that to some degree, in that there's like there's I've forgotten the word we were using now, but there's dedication. It wasn't dedication, but I'm going to go with dedication. Discipline was a word. There's discipline, and then there's like dysfunctional discipline, which is where, yeah, you're doing it you're disciplined about something that is kind of harming you in a sense, and then you require positive discipline to take you back from that and say, I'm not going to keep doing those disordered behaviors. Yeah, it's a really interesting thought. I definitely rambled there, but it's because I've not thought about it before. So I was kind of speaking as I was thinking.
No, not at all. That was I found it really intriguing, and it made me think. Just developing my thought further, that we often can miss eating disorders or body dysmorphic disorders because we cover them up with these words that look really good. Like, one is discipline, but also another one that came to mind is strength. Like, for example, with muscle dysmorphia, you think that by sticking to this diet and this training program, you're strong, when in truth, just like with discipline, you're not really disciplined because you're just staying in your comfort zone, and that's not discipline. That's easy to do in comparison to pushing yourself out of it. Similarly, you're not strong, you are weak, because the moments that things don't go your way, you fall apart. And I'm talking to myself, because people could have said, oh, you're so strong, you're able to maintain this mental fortitude, to follow this plan to a T. I was freaking weak. The moment I couldn't do exactly what I planned on doing, the world was ending.
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to kind of define, isn't it? Because I agree with you that I felt weak in that, even though I was doing these behaviors that people was linked synonymously with strength. And it's a real problem, and you made me think about it there with the whole, like, the way we cover up these disorders with these kind of words and with these ways of the strength and all these kind of things. And there's actually a study, so my whole PhD is basically looking at the reason for it is that in services that provide help for appearance concerns, so including disordered eating and that, we don't see many men, and we especially don't see many men who are oriented towards muscle. We see very few of those people, despite the fact that we know that they exist in the community from the bits of studies that we've done. We don't see them there. So I'm trying to figure out why that is. And one of the reasons why I think that probably is, and I'm yet to quite look into this bit, but is because when we view these people, especially with muscle dysmorphia, and they look muscular and they're lifting weights and they're doing those things, we are less likely to offer them help or assume that they might need help. Because, as you're saying, we kind of those words that we use to describe them are synonymous with healthy and synonymous with positive, and despite the fact that they may feel weak and may feel kind of defenseless and powerless, we view them as powerful. And there's a study that basically they showed 2 case studies. I think it was actually 4, but I'll say 2 for now. 2 case studies with muscle dysmorphia and anorexia, like written case studies, and showed them to undergrad students and asked them. Both the case studies said that the person gave the same negative consequences, so the person felt equally as sad and struggled equal amounts. But then they asked the student, how likely would you be to help that person? How likely do you think it is that person would be able to kind of get through it and recover? And they all basically the overwhelming statistic was that when they viewed people with muscle dysmorphia, they said that they assumed they would get better. And because of that, they wouldn't offer them any help or ask them how they were or that kind of thing. Whereas with anorexia, they assumed they wouldn't get better, so they would be much more likely to offer them help and ask if they're okay. So and that's part of the, it's something that I think that I try and talk about a lot, and I think I maybe talk about too much to some degree. But one of the big issues with disordered eating, body image issues around muscle is the lack of empathy we have for them, because they're so tied to, they're the ideal as far as society talks about. They've hit it. They've got the abs, they've got the big arms, the shoulders. So why should we give a shit about them? They're doing great as far as appearance concerns go. So people really struggle to be empathetic towards them and to want to help them, I think. And that so it's not even just that these people who are struggling with muscle issues aren't seeking help or aren't realizing or aren't whatever. It's that the rest of us aren't asking or aren't putting things in place to try and help them. And it's the same thing I think with steroids to some degree. We have so much evidence that steroids are very dangerous for people, and we have so little evidence about the way, how much people should take and how much people in a safe, in quote unquote manner. But the services available to help people who are using them and stuff just don't exist. And I think partly it's because we just assume that they're vain, they just want to look good, it's just vanity, they just got big egos, so why would we bother helping them? And I think that's a real barrier to try and help in this population. And yeah, I had multiple GP appointments where I'd mention about feeling crap about my eating or whatever, and doctors would kind of brush it aside. And I had one doctor, it's a story I tell all the time, but one doctor who flexed his arm at me and said oh, you're probably fine though, don't worry about that, and kind of hinted oh, your arms are pretty big, so I wouldn't worry about your eating, or you know what I mean? It's just that writing off any of my concerns because you look strong, so you must be the big old green tick, you're fine. And yeah, so I think that's a real problem.
That's a wrap for part 1. If you want to connect with George, you're going to find the links to do so in the show notes, as well as the links to the 2 charities that he is mentioning throughout this podcast. If you want to connect with me or you want to work with me, you can apply for coaching by using the same links in the show notes. And I will see you, figuratively speaking, next week for part 2. Thanks as always for your time, and until next week. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.